Our story begins with one of the bad endings from that game where the girl is no simple villainess. In a world that fell into despair, she wanted to destroy it all, the world's mid-level boss, the Witch of Calamity, Yon Hanul. In the scenario where they fail to kill her, every being in the world will cease to exist, leading to the bad ending. On a sunny, ordinary spring day, a new semester was beginning in a 5th grade elementary class. The teacher announced the arrival of a new student. That mundane, everyday life crumbled all too soon. Our protagonists noticed that their new classmate had an insanely faint blue color, a round rabbit tail, and long rabbit ears held high on her head. The kid then introduced herself as Yon Hanwell. That day, after observing his new classmate and hearing her share her hobbies, reading, listening to music, and dramas, he remembered his past life. However, there was no reason for him to dwell on nostalgia, since standing in front of him was someone with a more mature voice than before, when she expressed her hope for them to get along. He remembered the witch stating that such a rotten world is better off disappearing. This made him certain that the Witch of Calamity who brought the world to an end was in front of him, the mid-level boss, Yon Hanul. He was so certain that he couldn't deny it even if he wanted to, and thought that they were doomed. Brave Hearts is a game that our protagonist used to enjoy in his past life. It was about a boy dreaming of becoming the best hunter, the fighting spirit's apprentice, Kang Han Buell. This school-action RPG game, set 200 years after a cataclysm. It features monsters and hunters in a world where science and magic coexist. To become a hunter, our protagonist enrolls in Zhonggang Academy, located in Education Town, and encounters multiple scenarios. Until that point, it resembled a stereotypical youth school life plot. But the story wasn't all that bright, because the game had as many as 44 endings, most of which were world collapse scenarios. Braveheart had one more significant problem. It featured a soft-hearted and cowardly swordsman character who could never fully demonstrate his abilities. Completely useless and annoying, he would flee during battles. An innocent boy who doesn't know how to hate, and even when bullied, he remained a frustrating crybaby who never thought to defend himself. The bane of the protagonist's party. That character is our protagonist, the rabbit of the divine sword arts, Duk Yunwoo. Our protagonist wonders why he has to be such a problematic character if he was reincarnated. As if that weren't enough, he ended up in the same class as that dangerous character. He cries under his desk, thinking that no matter how hard he tries, it is beyond his abilities. Suddenly, their teacher called him, which shocked him. Tearingly, he looks at Yon Hanul, who was standing shyly. He knows that Hanul, who became the Witch of Calamity in the game, was a character who seemed to bear the suffering of the whole world. Abandoned by her parents at birth, ridiculed and regarded as an eyesore, she received not an ounce of affection from others, leading to a lonely and weary life. All of it happened due to a mana disaster, and being born with mutated DNA, she was an A. He remembered hearing that an Ain's appearance and DNA do not match their parents. But he was convinced that abandoning Hanul was too cruel, helping him understand why Hanul became the Witch of Calamity. However, he knows he can't sit by and let the world's downfall happen. He thinks the easiest solution would be to eliminate Hanul before she becomes a calamity, but he doesn't want to resort to that, making him wonder if there is any other way. He then gets an idea. His teacher then tells him to choose a classmate he wants to sit next to, and do so if they agree. This directive makes him think that he must change Hanel's way of thinking. As he walks towards her, he remembers that Hanel's unfortunate circumstances and environment led her to resent the world. However, if it was now, a time when the game's story hasn't begun, his actions could potentially change the future. He knows that among the villains of the game, Yona Hanel possesses the ability to destroy the world. He greets her, and she looks at him confusedly, while he is busy thinking that he will help Hanel not to be pessimistic about the world. He then asks her if he can sit next to her, thinking that if it progresses and he brings her to his side, he can reinforce his strength. She is confused and stutteringly asks if he is talking to her. He knows there are 5 years left until the start of the game's story, so before enrolling in the academy, he has decided to become friends with Yone Hanul. By guiding her to the right path, he hopes to turn her from a calamity into a blessing. He grabs the chair next to her and sits down, smilingly telling her that she will be his partner from today onwards. and that she should take care of him. He then introduces himself to her as Duke Kunwoo, and that's how Kunwoo became the childhood friend of the mid-level boss. When their classes ended, he stared at her as she picked up her bag, wondering how he could get closer to her. She asked him if he could stop looking at her, to which he apologized, embarrassed, wondering if he had stared at her for too long. As she walked away, he once again stared at her, thinking he should stop overthinking and just directly ask her to come to his house. However, he then noticed her small tail, and when she stutteringly called him, he jumped a little in shock and asked what it was. She walked closer to him, and he asked what was wrong, but instead, she questioned why he was sitting next to her. He replied that it was because he wanted to be friends with her. She was stunned upon hearing his answer, and shyly asked why he wanted to be friends with her. He responded that he just wanted to be friends, asking what else it could be, noticing that her ears popped up. She stutteringly expressed confusion about why he wanted to be friends with someone like her, especially since he was from a famous swordsmanship family. He silently stared at Hanul, who seemed sad. Then, remembering something, he happily shouted "Mongsil" to her, telling her that she was as cute as a rabbit he once had and that he really liked rabbits. She resembled one of them. She shook upon hearing this and, with a flushed face, shouted that she was not a rabbit. She then ran to the door, making him wonder if his comment had upset her, but he immediately apologized. Before she exited the door, she stopped and stutteringly told him that she would see him tomorrow. She then ran away, leaving him relieved that she wasn't angry with him. A moment later, as he walked down the street, he couldn't believe that he had entered the world of the game. He wondered why he couldn't see his status window if the world was still a game. He then checked behind him and shouted, "Status window!" Suddenly, the system popped up in front of him, and he decided to take a closer look. He was then surprised to see that Duke Yunwoo's abilities were quite impressive for his young age, with physical strength at 37, muscle strength at 34, endurance at 32, agility at 43, mana at 30, and luck at 25. Convinced that his abilities were actually quite good, he wondered why Kyunwoo was constantly bullied with such capabilities, but he acknowledged that it was a fresh start, far superior to his previous life. A moment later, he arrived at his mansion and upon entering shouted, "I'm home." The lady of the house greeted him along with the maid and asked how school was and if everything was okay. He was stunned to see the lady, but rushed to hug her. She asked wordly what was wrong. He knew that he was not living his past life, nor should he think he was living in a game. So he decided he should fully embrace his life as Duke Yunwoo. He then told the lady it was nothing and that he just felt grateful to have her. She advised him that if something happened, he should tell her, and instructed him to wash up and that she would prepare a snack before he headed to the sword training academy. He replied, "Okay," and ran to his room, walking upstairs knowing that he needed to embrace his role as Duke Yunwoo. What he needed most right now was to master the Beast King style, a sword technique that represented a prestigious swordsmanship family like his, like a lion reigning over all the beasts. This technique was focused at the tip of the sword and was also the technique that made Kunwoo the greatest swordsman. He then called for Mengshu, his male rabbit. Getting closer, he took the rabbit out of its cage, noticing that Mengshu resembled Hanul. He thought to himself that he should completely master the Beast King style. A moment later, in the training room, he noticed there were few people around and realized he was early. He knew that these sword training academies operated in several cities, and people outside the family learned conventional swordsmanship, not the Beast King style, which was why so many attended the training academy. He wondered why everyone stopped what they were doing and looked in the same direction. There he saw Du Xion, the Du family's sword deity, known as Lightning Flower. 2 years his senior and the most promising prodigy among all the current Du family children. In the game, Xion is a student at Junggang Academy who becomes the strongest swordsman after graduation, and a strong ally of Duke Yunwoo. He pondered why Xian was there, but realized that, being a sword training academy of the Du family, it wasn't unusual for her to be present. He hung up his shirt, knowing they would soon see each other often, and decided to focus on practicing the Beast King style. He grabbed the training sword and began. Positioning himself, he swung his sword and executed the Beast King style's first form, counting each repetition until he reached 10. He paused, wondering if Xian would be impressed by his practice, enjoying the sweat and fun of the exercise, when he suddenly heard someone asking, "Who is that?" One kid derisively inquired what was wrong with him, while another teasingly asked if a rabbit was now practicing too. He then saw Wu Jundong, who was eating, questioning if it was really the rabbit. Wu Jundong asking why he was there so early, and Wu Dongdong questioning whether he could use his skills in a real fight and betting that he couldn't catch even one rabbit. He knew these three identical triplets were the extra characters called the Cerberus in the game, and they were the kids who bullied him, spurred on by his cousin Sung Wu's influence. Frustrated by their presence, he realized it was the first time he couldn't focus due to their teasing. One of the triplets pressed him on why he wasn't responding. He understood that their taunts weren't the only reason he couldn't concentrate. He was also angry at himself for allowing the bullying. He remembered everything that happened to Kunwu in his past life and questioned why he had never fought back against their harassment. The triplets had once heard him, telling him that the head of the Du family must be ashamed of him, that he was a disgrace to the family, and that they felt sorry for his parents. This memory reminded him that he hated hurting people. Dongdong mockingly asked what the point of swinging his sword was. He also suggested they should become his sparring partners, with Yundong teasingly offering their help. Knowing the human body is not weak at all, Kyunwoo told them they should spar lightly as if it were a real game. A moment later, the other kids were in shock when he executed his Beast King-style technique. The charging stance and struck Jungdong in the stomach. Jungdong was thrown back and Dongdong, worried, called out to him, noting that his nose was bleeding. Yundong stutteringly asked what was wrong with him. Dizzy, Jungdong told his brothers that he couldn't see well. Angrily, he questioned Jungdong if he expected to be the end. He then urged them to quickly pick up his swords and stand up. Dongdong, who was checking on his brother, remarked that Kyunwoo was quite weird, while Yundong was horrified, telling his brothers that Kyunwoo had changed. He reassured them not to exaggerate and to stand up because people don't die from that much. Hyunwoo then reminded them that he, who had been hit by them in the past, could assert this. Yundong shouted, asking why he was doing this to them and if he was crazy. Yundong then reminded him that they had powerful backing and questioned if he thought he'd let this slide. Hyunwoo coolly asked if they were referring to his cousin, Sungwoo, and if they thought Sungwoo would protect them. The triplets were shocked when they heard this and remembered a time on the street when they shouted about becoming hunters, and Sunwoo told them that the fees for hunter education were too high and realistically speaking, it was unreasonable. Jungdong mentioned that they heard talents are sponsored, and Dongdong excitedly asked if that meant the fees would be free. Sunwoo had asked them if they wanted to get sponsored, to which they all agreed. Sunwoo then told them that he would handle it and that it was nothing difficult. However, he noted that they were in the same school as Kyunwoo, which meant they would see Kyunwoo often. Kyunwoo then told the triplets that he had just been letting himself get bullied before, and it also seemed they had forgotten that he was part of the Du family too, which meant it was easy for him to remove them from his family's sponsoring list if he chose to. He then asked them if they really thought that Sungwoo was the only one who could do it. The triplets were horrified, wondering how things had turned out this way. Suddenly, their teacher called them punks and demanded to know what they were doing and how many times he needed to tell them not to spar without permission. The teacher then told him that even if he was not a model member of the Du family, he shouldn't be fighting, but Kyunwoo simply pointed to the triplets and replied that they started at first. This left the teacher confused, but Kyunwoo asked if he was expected to just stay still and endure their bullying when he was a Du just as much as they were. The teacher then asked the triplets if they really had been picking on Kyunwoo. Initially stunned, they glanced away to think, and then all admitted that they had started it. Confirming that Kyunwoo was right, they had cursed at him, and Kyunwoo was not at fault. This left the teacher looking at them confusedly, while Kyunwoo, feeling refreshed from the thought to himself that he should have stood up for himself earlier. The next day, he arrived at school and walked into the classroom, wondering if he had arrived too early. He then looked to his side and saw Hanwell alone, deeply engrossed in her book. He stared at her for a moment and greeted her. She shyly covered her face with the book and greeted him back. He then sat next to her, determined to try his best to befriend Hanwell that day. He commented that she was early every day and always reading books, then asked if she really liked reading that much. She replied yes and asked him if he liked reading too. He responded that he was not really into books, but more into web novels, which confused her. When she asked why he joined the book club, he replied that it was because she had signed up. She said she understood, but then shyly asked him to repeat what he said. He playfully asked if she read web novels too. She stutteringly admitted yes, but explained that she didn't have much pocket money, so she could only read the free ones. Remembering that she lived in an orphanage, he decided to change the topic to avoid offending her and asked what drama she liked. She replied that she enjoyed the drama Luxury House and asked him how he knew she liked dramas. He reminded her that she had mentioned it during her introduction. Surprised that he remembered, she wondered why he was talking to her and if it was because he didn't have any friends either. She suspected that Kyun-woo was only fascinated because she was an AN and feared that he too would eventually lose interest. Seeing her become downcast at the thought, he noticed her ears and wondered if she would mind if he asked to touch them. He then realized she really resembled Mongshil and got an idea. He asked her if she wanted to see a video of Mongshil, and when she asked if that was his rabbit, he told her he had taken a cute video of Mongshil the day before. She expressed interest in seeing it, and he showed her the video, explaining that when rabbits are in a good mood, they jump around excitedly in what is called a binky. She was amazed to see it and commented on how cute Mongshil was. He noticed her rabbit ears stand up again, so he asked her if she wanted to come to his house to see Mongshil. She immediately replied yes, but then hesitated when she realized what she had agreed to. He then raised his little finger as a promise and suggested they play at his house after school. His face turned red as tomatoes, and she thought she should refuse because she didn't want to relive past negative experiences. But after school, she was amazed and surprised when she saw his house, remarking that it was like the one in Luxury House, the drama she watched. Hyunwoo's mother then came out and asked Hanul if she was Hyunwoo's friend, welcoming her warmly. Hyunwoo greeted his mother happily, while Hanul was in shock. Remembering how her old friend's parents had told them not to play with Ains and warned her not to just befriend anyone. Kunwoo's mother told Hanul that it was the first time Kunwoo had brought a friend over and expressed how happy she was, encouraging her to have fun. Kunwoo then asked his mother if she could make them tidiakbaki, to which his mother happily agreed. He grabbed Hanul's hand and urged her to come in quickly, despite knowing that Kunwoo's curiosity might not last. Hanul still didn't want to let go of his hand. Inside, she was shocked to see that his house was incredibly spacious. They then ate tteokbokki together and played with Mongshul, which made her very happy. Hours later, Kunwoo's father came home and announced cheerfully that he was back. Kunwoo's mother mentioned that he was a bit late today. And Kunwoo greeted his father, who acknowledged his tardiness and asked why Yi-Yun was rolling on the floor crying earlier, upset that she wanted to see her rabbit sister too. Kunwoo explained that his friend had come over today, but Yi-Yun wasn't home, which is why she was upset. Kunwoo then approached his father and asked if they could spar after dinner. His father was initially surprised, but then excitedly said he had been wondering when he'd get to play with him, especially now that he was in 5th grade. Kyun-woo expressed his desire to see how much he had improved and also to experience actual combat. His father, taken aback, asked if he really meant actual combat, to which Kyun-woo replied yes, and added that he'd like to face some real monsters. A moment later, his father asked him why he suddenly wanted to spar, and told him that he didn't need to be impatient because it was not yet his time to face the real thing. His father also inquired about his motivations. Hyun-woo looked at his hand, knowing that in 5 years, he would enter the Du Family Sword Academy headquarters and inevitably face crises while solving various incidents alongside the protagonist, Kang Han-byul. For this, he needed a good grasp of actual combat. He was sure that the other kids in the Do family had already gained their combat experience, and he was far behind them, so he knew he needed to catch up now. When he didn't answer, his father looked at him and asked if it was because of the incident at the sword training academy just now. His father then seriously told him that he heard about the fight at the academy and that the kid he fought was seriously injured. However, he reassured Kunwoo that he had done nothing wrong. Shocked upon hearing this, Kunwoo saw that his father seemed more interested in the truth than in scolding him, but he knew that he would never fight without reason. He then replied that he had been taught from a young age that the sword from the divine swordsmanship of the Du family was meant to protect and save people, and he had taken that lesson to heart. He believed that he wouldn't have this notion if he hadn't reflected on his past life and the lessons from it, and thinking about the future had changed his mindset. He then asked his father if he shouldn't be able to protect himself and how someone who can't protect themselves could protect others. His father asked if that was the reason he fought, to which he confidently replied yes, and explained that he could protect not only himself but others as well, and for that, he needed to face real monsters. His father smiled upon hearing his answer and told him that he was not wrong and his reasoning was completely valid. His father then patted his head and told him that he had changed a lot. He asked his father if he would help him, to which his father replied that he would, but there was a condition. He asked his father what it was. His father pointed the training sword at him and told him to prove that he had developed enough skill to face a real monster. His father then said he wouldn't use mana and wouldn't move more than 5 steps, so he should feel free to pounce. He asked his father about using the Beast King style, and his father replied that he would only use the basics, to which he responded that he understood. He hesitated about the conditions set by his father, but was glad that his father told him not to hesitate to use the sword if necessary. His father then teasingly told him to attack, and he decided to do exactly as his father instructed. He excelled to calm himself and positioned his training sword. He then swung his sword at his father, who easily blocked it without moving, causing him to be thrown off balance a little, but he managed to land perfectly. He then bent his knees, jumped high, and launched another attack on his father, but his father blocked it again. His father then pushed him slightly away and told him that it wasn't going to work, but he immediately launched his sword without going down and swung at his father, who jumped away to dodge it. When he saw his father just land, he knew it was the right time, so he immediately launched an attack again, but his father blocked it. As his father began to speak, telling him that he was going to use it, he struck his father on the side without letting his father finish his words. His father looked at his side, seeing that he had managed to hit him. His father then jumped away, holding his side in pain, and called him a brat, telling him that he had allowed the hit, but that it was really hard. Exhausted, he asked his father if he could acknowledge his ability, but his father just told him that he had really grown up and didn't even hesitate to hit his own father. He laughed and asked if he passed, to which his father shouted affirmatively, of course, calling him a rude brat. The next morning, his father told his mother that they would be leaving and would probably return home before dinner. His mother warily asked if he was sure about sending Kyunwoo there, questioning if Kyunwoo was too young and if it wasn't too early for him, while Ye-yoon shouted that she wanted to go too. He and his father were both stunned upon hearing his mother and sister. His father then told his mother that he thought it would be fine, to which he agreed. His mother then told him to be careful and not to overdo it, to which he replied affirmatively, telling his mother not to worry because he would be back later. They entered the car, and his father asked him if he was ready, suggesting they head to the clan academy, to which he replied affirmatively. His father then started driving. He remembered that, according to the game settings, the world had become dramatically unstable since the time of the calamity change, heavily influencing the world. This instability began as monsters started pouring out from the distorted dimension, leading to a dungeon being transformed on the other side. In that process, when the distorted dimensions of different worlds meet, a gate is created. He knew that if this phenomenon wasn't resolved in time, the world inside the gate would explode and scatter into reality. An outbreak is a phenomenon where the world in the gate explodes and scatters out. It differs from dungeons, and if they fail to conquer it within the time limit, it will significantly impact the ending. He knew that to reach the desired ending, they also needed to pay attention to the gate erosion rate, which was necessary for character growth as well. His thoughts were interrupted when his father told him that they should grab the key first after arriving. He asked his father where the gate key was, and his father replied that it was kept in the warehouse. He knew that once they cleared a gate, they obtained a gate key with which they could clear it again, a feature created by the game developers for players who wanted to re-clear the gate. He pondered whether this setting was still in function after his reincarnation. A moment later, his father stopped the car and told him that they had arrived. They got out and his father introduced him to his workplace, the Regulus clan. The Regulus clan was established during the catastrophe by the first head of the Du family. It now has several branches across the country. Access to the dungeon gates and monster habitats managed by the government normally requires a hunter's certificate. He knows that since he doesn't possess a certificate yet, he shouldn't be able to enter the gate. However, his father, who is the branch manager, is greeted warmly by the employees, making his situation within the clan unique. He thinks he doesn't need to adhere strictly to those restrictions and, with his father's help, can just go through the gate that is kept by the clan. Suddenly, he heard someone shout excitedly, and a hand grabbed him. A lady then hugged him, asking if he was their manager's son, while the other employees surrounded him, glad that he looked all innocent. A good thing he didn't take after his father. One employee began to pinch his cheeks, telling him how cute he was and that they wanted to hug him with all their might. A moment later, he was showered with kisses by the employee hunters when the lady asked his father if he intended to enter the gate with his son, leaving him wondering if all the hunters were so affectionate. The lady then tells his father that they shall access room 2 as planned, and his father tells him that they should go. However, he is confused when he sees the key and asks his father why the key he just received is white. He remembers that the gate's levels of difficulty are differentiated by 7 different key colors, starting from the easiest level, white, followed by gray, yellow, green, red, blue, and the most difficult, black. His father tells him that white will be challenging enough for him, to which he replies that he understands, but truthfully, he wants to attempt the gray level. His father then opens the gate and tells him that they should go in. He then saw another gate inside, and his father explained that it was an artificial gate, and that if he inserted the key obtained by clearing a dungeon there, the gate would open. He was amazed to see it and remembered that they could upkeep a large clan thanks to the maintenance costs, realizing how powerful his family was. His father then called him over seriously to tell him that they were going to enter the gate now and asked if he was sure he was ready. His father advised him to think it through again because once they were in there, they could not leave until they had cleared the dungeon. He silently looked at his father for a moment and confidently replied that he had given it enough thought already. His father smiled wordly at him, but before inserting the key, he asked his father if he would intervene if he was unable to clear it. His father replied that even if he failed, he would have his back, so he shouldn't overdo it and make him get scolded by his mother. His father then inserted the key and activated the gate. The gate slowly opened, and as he entered, he saw crystals everywhere, shining brightly. He looked around in amazement. It was his first time entering a gate, and then the system popped up, showing him that he had entered the white level's pink crystal cave, and his mission was to eliminate 15 goblins ranked .1. As he read the system, he wondered if the conditions for clearing were simple because it was a white level gate, and asked where the goblins might be. Suddenly, he heard a sound behind him, quickly drew his sword, and positioned himself while holding the real sword, knowing it was dangerous and he should be cautious. He then waited, staying on guard so he wouldn't be taken by surprise. He was then surprised to see his father in front with the goblins tied up. He ran to his father and asked if he had captured all the goblins. His father replied that they were all there. He counted the goblins and confirmed there were 15 in total. He calmed himself down and told his father he was ready. His father said they should begin then, and since he couldn't handle them all at once, they should start with one. His father walked towards the smallest goblin, telling him it might be the weakest of the group, but he shouldn't be careless and must stay alert. But before his father could finish his sentence, the goblin freed itself in anger, surprising his father a little. The goblin then rushed at him while he asked his father if he was referring to the fact that they are fierce, to which his father agreed and reminded him not to forget it. He knew that he possessed knowledge from games, but as a member of the divine swordsmanship due family, he also held knowledge about monsters, and he thought these creatures must have understood that their only chance to survive was to fight him. The goblin then grabbed a sharp crystal, making him realize it was desperate enough to use a crystal as a weapon, and he knew he had to be cautious because a small mistake could be disastrous. He then bent down, thinking that since it was an actual fight, he should put in his everything. He then activated his Beast King-style basic technique, fifth form piercing stance, and thrust his sword at the goblin's head. He pierced his sword into its head, and the goblin kneeled on the ground. The goblin then lay on the ground dead, causing his father to sigh in relief. He tightly grasped his sword and proudly declared that one was down for now. As a party member of the main character, Kong Hanbyul, Do Kyungwoo has one restriction. There is a feature called Gift in the game, and among the passive skills that define the character, Do Kyungwoo's gift is Evasion Instinct. At first glance, it seems like a useful ability. His father then released 2 goblins, and as they faced him, he contemplated that evasion instinct is literally the ability to move one's body instinctively to avoid attacks when sensing a life-threatening crisis. While it appeared to be a useful ability for Do Kyunwoo, who wields a sword, his fearful and fragile character often leads him to disobey commands, causing the gift to be rejected. Due to this gift, players generally did not include Do Kyunwoo in their party unless it was unavoidable. The evasion instinct also caused Kyunwoo to defy player commands, leading to frustration. However, there is an event in the story that triggers Kyunwoo's awakening. Later in the narrative, Kyunwoo gains control over his gift after the awakening. A character who awakens late becomes a remarkably strong morale booster, and later, Kyunwoo demonstrates his overwhelming ability to defeat enemies by avoiding most of their attacks. He remembers that it was said raising Kyunwoo well could make the later part of the game easier, but he knows it is still a long way off, and if he does nothing but wait, it'll be too late. So he couldn't just sit still and wait. The goblins growled at him in anger, and he stared back at them, knowing he needed to advance his awakening. He knew it might be impossible if it was just a game, but for him, it was reality. He then remembered that when he played the game, he didn't find any situation that triggered the awakening in the later part of the story, so he thought it must not be hard to awaken early. He then jumped closer to the goblins and swung his sword, determined to push himself to the limit. Later, many goblins lay dead on the ground, but he told his father to release the next one. His father suggested they take a rest, but he replied that if it was only to that extent, he was fine. His father sighed and said that if he insisted, they should face all of them while the last 4 goblins stared at him in anger. His father then released them all, and the goblins rushed at him, but they all jumped behind him, catching him off guard. He looked around, wondering if it was a diversion tactic, and noticed that 2 of the goblins were above him, but he couldn't locate the other 2. Suddenly, he felt something approaching from behind. He let his body react for a moment, and his gift, evasion instinct, swiftly moved him to the side. Then, something from behind tried to hit him, but he avoided it, and it struck the crystal in front instead. He was stunned in horror when he realized that his body had moved without his conscious will, indicating that his gift had activated. Knowing that the evasion instinct had sensed the crisis, he resolved to trust that instinct. He then positioned his feet, ready to deal with the goblins first. Thanks to his gift, he managed to spot where the 4 goblins were hiding and swore he wouldn't fall for their trick again. One of the goblins threw another crystal from behind, but he reassured himself it was fine since his evasion instinct was activated. He dodged the crystal, shocking the goblin who threw it. He then jumped, using the crystal to reach one of the goblins trying to hit him with arrows. He slashed the goblin in half with his Beast King-style basic second form attack stance, but was surprised when he looked behind and saw the goblins waiting for him at his intended landing spot with a sharp crystal. He then compressed and rotated the mana within his body, loading the mana that emerged from his heart into his sword, now wrapped by mana. He swung his sword with his Beast King-style first form line crush cut and successfully slashed the 2 goblins waiting for his landing. He then safely landed on the ground and asked if only one was left, shouting that he'd go straight for it. However, his father told him there was no need to rush and asked what if he got hurt, but he replied that it was okay because he believed he could handle it. His father warned him to be careful since it was the last one, and he should be more cautious. He agreed and headed toward the last goblin. A moment later, his father silently watched him, deciding to trust in his son while observing the piles of dead goblins he had slain. He was catching his breath when his father called out to him. The system then displayed that he had cleared the gate and that an exit gate would be generated where the gate key would appear. It also warned that the gate would close in 24 hours. Then, a bright circle of light appeared above them, and within it was the key. The key then landed in his palm, and he saw that it was the same white key they had used. He clenched his teeth and cursed inwardly. His father laughingly asked what was with his face and if he didn't believe that he had cleared the gate. He just called to his father, who responded with a smile and pride. But he merely asked his father if there were any other gates. He then realized that he couldn't use that dungeon for practice until the cooldown was over. As the gate closed, the power inside it was depleted, but he knew that the gate would become active again after replenishing its mana. This made him wonder what he should do next, since he hadn't awakened his gift yet. His thoughts were interrupted when his father, Sang-jun, told him that he was very surprised and had thought he would stop after 4 goblins, but in the end he managed to defeat 5 of them easily. Sang-jun then shook him while proudly asking, "Whose son are you?" and told him that there was nothing left to do there, so they should clean up and go home. Sang-jun headed to the exit and asked for the key, but he hesitantly called out to Sang-jun and asked if there was any other gate, leaving Sang-jun looking at him confused. He explained that he felt like he was about to awaken his gift, and it would be a pity to go back just like that. He asked Sang-jun if they shouldn't try clearing another gate if there was enough time left. Sang-jun asked him if he just said he seemed to have awakened, to which he replied yes, and suggested that they should do something more challenging. He told Sang-jun that he thinks they'll be okay to enter a great gate, and that he can now handle 2-rank monsters. Sang-jin, looking serious, reminded him that his mother, Jaya, would be furious if she knew he allowed such a thing. Nonetheless, he insisted that everyone will die eventually, prompting Sang-jin to question if he really was his son. Sang-jin then acknowledged his desire to push himself, but warned that fighting a 2-rank monster was too much for him at the moment. However, if it was a white-gray gate, it would be fine. He asked Sang-jin if that was really what he thought, and Sang-jin paused to think before agreeing. He told him that as a swordsman he understood what he meant, but if he became too ambiguous he wouldn't achieve anything, which made him happy. He thanked his father, but Sang-jin just reminded him that he would step in whenever he was in danger. They then headed to the white-gray gate, and he realized that not all white-gray gates were the same. Sang-jin warned him that it was going to be tough and that he had brought support just in case, pointing to the man who greeted them. He knew that the support consisted of dungeon-specialized magic supporting hunters who typically used healing or buffs to assist hunters. Sang-jin warned him to be cautious, as monsters might rush them immediately after entering the dungeon. Sang-jin then asked if he was ready to go, to which he confidently replied yes. They then entered the gate, and the system notified him that he had entered the white-gray gate, Pink Crystal Cave, and his mission was to subjugate 15 monster goblins of 1 rank. He looked around and realized it was the same world where he had fought earlier. He was wondering where the monsters were when he felt something approaching and managed to dodge it just in time. Horrified, he wondered what had just happened, but then the system alerted him that numerous monsters had appeared. 4 normal goblins, 7 swordsman goblins, 3 archer goblins, and 1 mage goblin. He noticed that there were 15 goblins, but these weren't ordinary goblins. They had specific roles that drove him crazy. He knew his evasion instinct was activated, and his gift controlled his body. He also knew that if he didn't want to die, he should run away. The man told Sang-jun that it might be hard for Kunwoo and asked if he really left him alone. Sang-jun didn't answer, knowing that Kunwoo had changed recently. In the past, he was easily startled by small things. But lately, he seemed different, and Sang-jun was convinced that he was stronger now, and it was not a bad change. Sang-jun knew that Kunwoo had grown up to be a kind-hearted kid, but he didn't fit the fierce competition in the divine swordsman Du family due to his kind-hearted nature. He always hesitated to hurt others, even if it put himself in danger. Sang-jin thought of how his son smiled happily when he received his first sword, and how he would cry happily whenever he held a sword. Sang-jin then sadly looked at his hand, thinking about how many of Kunwoo's peers mocked him by calling him a rabbit. Whenever he heard that, he wanted to step in but couldn't. He wondered why Kunwoo had changed when he became a 5th grader. Jaya had told him that the change was because he liked someone in his class, but Sang-jin suspected there must be another reason. Sang-jin recalled that while he was contemplating Kunwoo's situation, someone from the sword training academy had contacted him. The man introduced himself as Kunwoo's swordsmanship teacher. After hearing the teacher's complaints, Sang-jin asked if Kunwoo had been fighting with other kids under the pretext of sparring, asserting that his son wouldn't engage in such behavior without a reason. The teacher hesitated, guessing that Kunwoo hadn't told his father because of how he might react, and then revealed that Kunwoo had been bullied. Sang-jin, knowing his son would not harm other kids without cause, scolded the teacher in anger. The teacher tried to dismiss the behavior as typical playful roughhousing that he too had often engaged in. He asked Sang-jun if it wasn't natural for children of that age to get absorbed in their own strength and play around. Sang-jun, furious, questioned if this meant that Kyung-woo had been bullied by other kids so far and if the teacher was joking about such a serious matter. After Kyung-woo cleared the first dungeon and retrieved the key, Sang-jin noticed that he performed better than expected. Although Sang-jin had worried that his son might panic and rush, he saw that Kyung-woo could handle the situation calmly and adeptly. Sang-jin smiled, acknowledging that his child had been a prodigy since a long time ago. However, as he watched worriedly from above, he remembered that Kyung-woo was still only 12 years old and needed to grow calmly. Suddenly, Sang-jun's concern deepened when he saw Kyung-woo get injured in the arm, causing Sang-jun to clench his teeth at the thought that his misjudgment had put his son in danger. The man next to Sang-jun asked if it wasn't the right time to intervene, noting that Kyung-woo seemed to have run out of energy and that the monster might catch him. However, Kyung-woo remained calm, facing the goblins and challenging them to come at him. Sang-jun knew that stepping in would disappoint his son, but acknowledged that Kyung-woo was quite skilled for his age and decided to simply encourage him. Sang-jun then called out to a man named Hong-chul, instructing him to prepare the protection shield magic, to which Hong-chul responded that it might be needed at any moment. Sang-jun then detailed his plan. The moment the goblin attacked Kyung-woo, they would charge in all at once. He would take out the mage goblin first, while Hong-chul was to use the protection shield magic as Kyung-woo dodged the archer goblin. However, Sang-jun was stunned to see Kyung-woo's rigid movements, indicative of fear, yet he wondered if his perception was clouded by his own apprehension. As he positioned himself, Sang-jun was shocked to witness Kyung-woo slashing the goblins in front of him with his Beast King-style fourth-form lion needle recursion attack.